Good morning again. It's raining, but we got here high and dry. We're looking at BibleStudyManuals.net, K55. Okay? Now we're looking for this phrase here. Obvious conclusion is that plants and animals living in the early centuries after the flood, and so far, after 80 YouTubes, predominant favoritism is for a worldwide flood because of the appearance of the topography of the earth today, and scientifically looked at, observed, and what we can see today, had to have been created by a worldwide flood far more than evolution. Just not enough time for all the reasons that we've done in all these 80 YouTubes. So the obvious conclusion is that plants and animals living in the early centuries after the flood would have much less radioactivity, we're talking about radiocarbon dating, than would be assumed on the basis of present rates, and therefore would appear to be older than they are. Because remember, the protection of the canopy over the earth that carried the water for the worldwide flood. The specific radioactivity increased as time went on, approaching the present equilibrium rates. That is why radiocarbon dates for the last 4,000 years seems to show a generally good correlation with historically verified chronology, although there are many discrepancies and a large margin of error the farther back in time comparisons are made. But for earlier dates, the specific radioactivity in the terrestrial environment becomes progressively smaller as one goes back in time. Therefore, with material older than, say, about 4,000 years is analyzed now for radiocarbon, it would certainly be found that the activity was low, and if the age were then calculated on the basis of present equilibrium conditions and rates, it would necessarily be measured to be too old, with the amount of error increasing progressively with the age of the material. It's not a reliable method, because you presume uniformitarianism, and you can't presume that because you weren't there. You go back 3, 4, 5,000 years and you find out that things were quite different, especially before the flood. Therefore, the deluge and associated events adequately explain the data from carbon-14 studies. Instead of just presuming uniformitarianism and filing all kinds of wacky ideas, you plug in just for guesswork. Let's say there was a worldwide flood and it created this and it stopped the radiation, cosmic and so on, and so that the rates would be different, radioactivity would be different, accounting for the agreement with historically dated recent events. So if everything agrees, maybe that's what it was. Don't have to agree that the worldwide flood occurred, just let's rule it out. That's scientific. Rule things out, even though you don't think they're accurate, rule it out. That's the control in the scientific experiment. But at the same time indicating that the earlier unverified datings must be too high, as one would infer from the biblical records. Consequently, all the more important of the data from radioactivity methods of geochronometry harmonize perfectly with the biblical records, all of it, and inferences associated with the creation and the flood. You don't have to believe in it, just rule it out. Finds out it doesn't rule itself out, rules itself in. Space does not warrant discussion of all the methods that have been used or suggested, but only those which have been considered the most important and best established. It would be possible by similar analyses to show the essential harmony of the data from these other subsidiary methods. In other words, for example, the ionium method, the Varv chronologies, thermoluminescences, etc., with the biblically established facts of genuine recent creation and universal deluge. They all seem to fit. Much better than evolution. These events must be dated only some few thousands of years ago, according to the Bible, and the evidence that has been brought against this testimony has now been shown rather to harmonize quite satisfactorily with it. In fact, it would seem highly probable that no method of geochronometry could be devised that would permit determination of dates earlier than the flood, since all such processes whether geological or meteorological, would almost certainly have been profoundly disturbed and altered by the events of that global cataclysm. Cataclysm, okay. Big words. The scriptural description is that the world that was then was overflowed with water, perished. We looked at in 2 Peter 3:6. Now, you're not maybe a Bible student, but just let's program that in and rule it out. And the context shows that this statement comprises the geological earth and the atmospheric heavens. The only possible way in which men can know the age of the earth is by means of divine revelation, because factors change and there's so many things that are unknowable. Looking at things in the present, you can't assume everything in the present is the way it is unless you have a belief system that wants to force it, and that's what evolution is all about. Okay, what's next? We have conclusions on radioactive dating methods that we've looked at so far. Number one conclusion, unreliable data. Dr. Stephen A. Austin. Everyone has heard, and he's a scientist, I'm not. Everyone has heard about the great ages claimed by evolutionists for the Earth's rocks. This is perfectly true of Grand Canyon rocks, particularly true of Grand Canyon rocks. That's what they say. Television documentaries, textbooks, museum displays tell us that the deepest rock layers within Grand Canyon are more than 1 billion years old. Same evolutionary sources tell us that the most recent rocks of Grand Canyon are just thousands of years old. The great thickness of strata in Grand Canyon is supposed to be spanning geologic ages, representing many hundreds of millions of years. Two lava flow formations occur in the Grand Canyon, the Cardenas basalt and the western Grand Canyon lava flows. Both are basalts, and both should be ideal for radioactive isotope dating. All right, I think a crew went down there to try that. And this is the result. The deeply buried Cardenas basalt occurs among the oldest strata of Grand Canyon. This basalt has been assigned to the Precambrian rock strata of the Undar group, which contains the lowest and hence oldest strata of the Grand Canyon. Some geologists have suggested an age of more than 1 billion years. The western Grand Canyon lava flows are among the youngest formations of the Grand Canyon. The youngest flows came from volcanoes on the Uinkaret Plateau, north of the Colorado River. Some of the lava flowed over the North Rim, cascading into Grand Canyon, forming spectacular frozen lava flows. Several lava flows even reached the river, forming extraordinary freshness of the lava. It looks as fresh as any coulee of Vesuvius ejected 20 or 30 years ago. One potassium-argon model age determined gave 1.2 plus or minus 0.2 million years for the lava dam. Millions of years ago. Fresh. So, E.D. McKee, Hamblin, and Damon, they wrote an article, Potassium-Argon Age of Lava Dam in the Grand Canyon. Geological Society of America Bulletin. They're scientists, they're geologists. And geologists consider these lava flows to be Pleistocene in age. Rubidium, a trace element which is chemically similar to potassium, is naturally radioactive. 28% of rubidium atoms are the isotope rubidium-87. It decays to strontium-87, which is a common stable isotope of strontium. The radioactive decay of rubidium is slow and would require 48.8 billion years for half the 87 rubidium of a rock to be converted to 87 strontium. Evolutionary geologists have suggested that the isotope ratios of 87 rubidium to 87 strontium in rocks can be used to determine ages in hundreds of millions of years, even billions of years. So the isotope ratios of 6 rock samples from the Cardenas basalt, as determined by McKee, Noble, 2 geologists working with support from the U.S. Geological Survey. They're in the camp of the environmentalists, they're in the camp of the evolutionists, they're in the camp of the scientists. I'm not a scientist. National Science Foundation and National Aeronautics and Space Administration. Can you get better credentials than that? He describes a line in the plot of this 8786 strontium versus 8786 strontium is thought to testify to the validity of the method and the suitability of the specimens, and thus the basalt was given an age interpretation by the two geologists. They reasoned that the Cardenas basalt issued from a volcano or volcanoes, which originally had lavas with a common ratio of strontium isotopes. The original ratio of this, 87 to 86 strontium, of Cardenas basalt was believed to be 0.7065 according to million years, I guess, according to the age interpretation of these samples of Cardenas basalt with a higher 87 RB have over a very long period of time acquired a very large quantity of 87 strontium by radioactive decay of 87 rubidium. The quantity of 86 strontium is not affected by radioactive decay, and it stays constant. The sample calculation employed by this geologist indicates that it's 1.07 billion years would be required for the rock samples to acquire their various strontium isotopes ratios by rubidium decay. That age of 1.07 billion years is the rubidium-strontium isochron age of the Cardenas basalt, and is widely regarded by evolutionists as the best age obtained for Grand Canyon rocks. Okay, congratulations. The isotope ratios have obtained by the basaltic lava flows from the western Grand Canyon, from the Hawaii lava flows from the Unakarak Plateau on the north rim of Grand Canyon. 4 whole rock samples and 1 feldspar sample separated from of the rock samples were submitted independently to 3 different laboratories for testing. Okay, here we go. The data show a linear trend of 87-86 strontium line versus 87-86 plot. There is a distinct slope to the line, which is unexpected. We might suppose that these lava flows on the north rim of the Grand Canyon would be homogeneous with respect to strontium isotopes. All the rocks should have about the same strontium isotope ratios. Instead, we note that the lava flows having higher 87 rubidium also have higher 87 strontium. The abundances vary in a linear fashion. It would appear that an age relationship is suggested by the linear plot. Indeed, the same equation used to date the Cardenas basalt at 1.07 billion years gives an age of 1.34 billion plus or minus 0.04 billion years for the recent lava flows of western Grand Canyon. That is even older than the Cardenas basalt. So we have old ages for the young lava flows and young ages for the old ones. The observation that obviously recent lava flows from the north rim of Grand Canyon gives ages even older than the deeply buried lava flows challenges the basis upon which the isochron dating method is based. So at the very bottom of the canyon, you have the youngest ages as compared to the very top of the canyon where it's supposedly the latest lava flows occurred only 1 million years ago, and it's older than the bottom. First in the bottom, then it piles on top. When you fill a glass with water, the oldest water is at the bottom. But in this case, it's the reverse, by billions of years. It thus becomes evident that age measurements by radioactivity are not nearly so precise nor so reliable as most writers imply. The great variety of possible experimental errors and physical alterations in the quantities being measured have all combined to produce such a high degree of statistical scatter in the results of the computations, especially when compared with geochronological implications of the associated stratigraphy, that the great majority of the measurements have had to be rejected as useless for the desired purpose. Relatively only a handful has been accepted. Yes, acceptable. Yeah, it's how you believe. We've got to throw all this other stuff out. Only a handful will keep. I don't know what happens with the bottom of the canyon. It's supposed to be billions of years older than the top, and the top is billions of years older than the bottom. Wow. But of course, it would be answered by the evolutionists, that even though experimental errors may be important, the measurements are still sufficiently accurate to give in most cases age of at least the right order of magnitude. For example, a measurement indicating an age, say, of 1 billion years, evolutionists say, could hardly be an error by more than a factor of 10. Okay, just throw 10 billion years around like it's eggshells. And this would still give 100 million years nothing remotely comparable to the few thousand years implied by the Bible. That's ridiculous, they say. Furthermore, it will be maintained that even though any given age measure